With the huge success of the Netflix original Making a Murderer, the world got a chance to see the struggles and torment of a potentially wrongly convicted person. And although the case of Steven Avery is an extreme example, there are an unfortunate amount of people who have been accused of horrendous crimes they did not commit, some of which are in fact executed, only to be posthumously exonerated through the use of DNA testing or campaigns like the INNOCENCE project. Here are 5 people who were wrongly convicted for crimes that many say they had no involvement in. Kirk Bloodsworth. In 1984, an anonymous call from the public led to the arrest of 22-year-old former Marine Kirk Bloodsworth, who was later charged with the murder and rape of a 9-year-old girl whose body was found in a wooded area in Maryland. At his trial, Bloodsworth maintained his innocence, even though 5 witnesses testified that they had seen him with the victim, 2 of which, must be noted, had failed to identify him in a lineup, and there was also witnesses who could confirm Kirk was at home at the time of the killing. Regardless, the prosecutors pinned their evidence on 2 statements Kirk had made after his arrest. One was that he said he had done something that day that would affect his marriage, and 2, Kirk had knowledge of a bloody rock which was used in the killing of the 9-year-old girl. Now, it's not known what context this was said in, but Kirk later told that the first statement was something as innocent as him getting the wrong groceries, and the knowledge of the rock was due to the pictures he was shown of the murder during his interrogation. But these 2 remarks and the witness's statements was enough for Kirk to be convicted of murder and rape, despite no physical evidence, and sentenced to death. After his incarceration on death row, Bloodsworth continued to protest his innocence and launched an appeal against his conviction, which was overturned by the court and a retrial was ordered. This time he was still found guilty, but his sentence was reduced to 2 life terms and he would avoid execution. Continuing to protest his innocence, in the early 90s, Bloodsworth read a newspaper account of a British killer and rapist, Colin Pitchfork, who was the first criminal to be convicted using a new process called DNA fingerprinting. Bloodsworth pushed for samples from the crime scene to be tested using the same process, and luckily for him, the evidence was found stuffed into a locker and had not been destroyed, so tests were carried out. It was determined that bodily fluids found on the girl's clothing did not have the same DNA profile as Bloodsworth. Not long after, he received a call from his lawyer who was screaming down the phone, "You're innocent." After spending 9 years in prison, 2 of which were on death row, and being locked away during the death of his beloved mother, Bloodsworth was released and pardoned in 1993, the first person in history to be released as a result of DNA testing. Since his release, Kirk has worked tirelessly, fighting for others who have been wrongly convicted, and has been quoted many times saying, "If it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody." James Bain. In March 1974, a 9-year-old boy was asleep in his bedroom at his family's house in Lake Wales, Florida, where he was taken from his bed, dragged to a nearby baseball field and sexually assaulted. James later described his attacker as about 17 or 18 years old with a mustache and bushy sideburns, and said his name was Jim or Jimmy. Upon hearing this, James's uncle suggested to the police that it might be local 19-year-old Jimmy Bain, and after showing the photographs of 5 men, it was Bain James picked out as his attacker. After police questioned Bain, he was able to provide an alibi for his whereabouts on the evening of the attack, which was confirmed by his sister, but despite this, he was arrested. At his trial, there was little evidence to convict him apart from that one lineup. However, a damning testimony from an FBI analyst testified that bodily fluids found on the victim's clothes were of a blood type B, and Bain's blood type was a weak AB, so could not be excluded. This was in spite of his defense arguing he had a strong blood type A and could be excluded. However, he was convicted of rape, kidnapping and burglary and sentenced to life in prison. Bain spent 35 years of his life locked away, and even in 2001, when Florida made it possible for individual cases to be reopened for DNA examination, Bain's request was refused 5 times. Eventually, with the help of the INNOCENCE project, he was given access to post-conviction DNA testing. The test showed that it was not his DNA on the victim's clothing, therefore he could not have committed the crime. In December 2009, Bain was declared an innocent man and was released from prison. Immediately after, he used a cell phone for the first time in his life and rang his mother. He received $50,000 for every year he spent in prison, and is the longest serving innocent man to date in the US, but remarkably said he was not angry. Since his release, Bain has become a leading voice for the innocent movement and has shared his wrongful conviction experience with school and college students across the country. He is now married, has a young son, and is in the process of writing a book. James Joseph Richardson. On the morning of October the 25th, 1967, James and Annie Richardson sent their 7 children to school and left their home in Arcadia, Florida. They asked their trusted next-door neighbour and occasional babysitter, Betsy Reese, to feed the children a prepared meal when they came home for lunch. The children returned home, and upon returning to school after eating, they soon became unwell, were foaming at the mouth, shaking violently, and all 7 were rushed to hospital. Their parents were informed, but by the time they reached the hospital, 6 of their children were dead, and the other was fighting for her life, but sadly died the following day. An autopsy report concluded they all died of parathion poisoning, a deadly insecticide that had been put in their lunch. Suspicion soon fell on the children's father, after it was revealed by the county sheriff that he had seen an insurance broker in the days leading up to his children's death, and had inquired about insurance policies for his 7 children, himself and his wife. After a thorough search of the family home, nothing suspicious was found, although it was claimed that the day after, Reese the babysitter and another man were seen arguing over a bag of parathion that the pair claimed they had found in Richardson's shed. Despite suspecting Reese of any wrongdoing, Richardson was arrested, initially for the murder of just one of his children, but after a cellmate had told authorities Richardson had confessed to poisoning all of his children, he was tried for all 7 murders. At his trial, 2 of the informants testified against him and said Richardson had told them that he had put poison in his children's food after he was angry with his wife, who was having a lesbian affair with Reese, the babysitter. It took the jury just 2 hours to find Richardson guilty of the murder of all 7 of his children, and he was sentenced to death by electric chair. 4 years into his tormented time on death row, the sentence was commuted to life in prison after the death penalty was abolished in the county. It was 20 years before Richardson's lawyers secured a new trial and fresh evidence had been gathered. They also had affidavits stating that Reese, who was now in a nursing home, had confessed that she had poisoned the children. In addition to this, the one surviving jail informant claimed he had been pressured into implicating Richardson. Then on April the 25th, 1989, Richardson's conviction was quashed, and he was released from prison on May the 5th, 1989, after being incarcerated for 21 years, 5 of which were served on death row. It transpired that at the time of the killings, Reese was on parole for fatally shooting her second husband, and her first husband had died after eating a meal that she had cooked for him. Despite this revelation, Reese's failing mental health meant she was never convicted for the crime and died in hospital in 1992. As for Richardson, he is still alive despite suffering a variety of health problems relating to his false imprisonment, and lives quietly with his second wife in Kansas. To date, he has still not received his $1.2 million compensation awarded to him for his wrongful conviction, and lives with the thought that if the death penalty had not been abolished in his state, he would have been executed. Cameron Todd Willingham. 2 days before Christmas in 1991, 24-year-old unemployed mechanic Cameron Todd Willingham was at home with his 3 young daughters in Texas. His wife Stacy was out getting some presents for the children, and during this time a fire destroyed the family home. Willingham's daughters, 2-year-old Amber and 1-year-old twins Carmen and Cameron, all perished, but Cameron managed to survive with only minor burns. In the days after the blaze, an assistant fire chief and a state deputy fire marshal examined the scene and found pour patterns of gasoline or another accelerant on the floor of the property. There was also charred wood under an aluminium door threshold, along with strange patterns on the windows of the house known as crazed glass, all of which can suggest a fire was started intentionally. However, during this time, the forensics available were very limited in determining this, but nonetheless, they concluded that an accelerant was responsible for these anomalies, indicating the fire was arson, and Cameron was arrested. At his trial, prosecutors claimed he killed the children in an attempt to hide the fact that he was abusing them. They also claimed that Cameron had fallen out with his wife the night before, although no evidence was found to sustain these allegations, which included a statement from Cameron's wife. In addition to this, there was a very dubious testimony by jail informant Johnny Webb, who claimed Cameron confessed that he had set fire to the house in an attempt to hide the fact that his wife had severely injured one of the children, but no physical evidence was found on the girls' bodies. Another nonsensical claim was that Cameron's tattoo of a skull and serpent fitted the profile of a sociopath, a theory backed up by 2 medical experts in court. There really wasn't much hope for Cameron, and during the trial he was offered a life term in exchange for a guilty plea, which he flatly refused, claiming he was innocent. The trial lasted just a mere 2 days, and in 1992, Cameron was found guilty and sentenced to death. He remained in prison protesting his innocence and launched several unsuccessful appeals, but then his wife, who had stood by his side for many years, turned her back on him and stopped fighting for his freedom. For some reason, she then decided to reject his long wish to be buried next to his children. In 2004, Cameron was executed by lethal injection. Just before his execution, top arson analyst Gerald Hurst took a fresh look at the case and discredited every bit of the original evidence, explaining the poor patterns were left by a conventional hot racing post-flashover fire. The charred wood would not have been caused by an accelerant, as it would not burn under an aluminium threshold. He also dismissed the crazed glass as a pattern that forms on hot glass after being sprayed with cold water. He came to the conclusion that there was not a single piece of evidence suggesting arson. This new evidence was passed to Texas Governor Rick Perry just 4 days before the execution date, but Perry did not use his authority to delay the execution. Cameron Todd Willingham's final words before he was executed were, "The only statement I want to make is that I am an innocent man, convicted of a crime I did not commit. I have been persecuted for 12 years for something I did not do. From God's dust I came, and to God's dust I will return, so the earth shall become my throne." Followed by some hateful words to his wife, who many say were caused by the fact that she gave up fighting his innocence after many years of standing by his side. Nicholas Yaris. On December 15, 1981, 32-year-old Linda Mae Craig, a sales associate in a mall in Pennsylvania, finished her shift and got in her car to head home. When she didn't arrive, her husband called the police and a search was conducted. It wasn't long before her yellow Chrysler was found abandoned, and the following day her snow-covered body was found stabbed and beaten. Investigators managed to extract plenty of biological material from the crime scene, including fingernail scrapings and a pair of gloves believed to be her attackers found in the Chrysler. 4 days after, 19-year-old Nicholas Yaris, an alcoholic and drug addict, was driving along a Pennsylvanian roadway when police stopped him for a traffic violation. Yaris objected to being stopped, and he quickly got into a violent confrontation with the police officers that resulted in him being arrested for attempted murder. Inexplicably, whilst in custody, Yaris accused an acquaintance of committing Linda's murder, but when Yaris' acquaintance was ruled out, Yaris became the prime suspect. At the time, the biological evidence was not advanced enough to be able to rule him out, and after relying on a jailhouse informant and evidence from Linda Craig's co-workers that Yaris had been seen harassing the victim, he was convicted of murder, rape and abduction and sentenced to death. For many years, Yaris pleaded his innocence, and with the emergence of DNA profiling, he demanded DNA testing to prove his innocence, which initially failed to conclusively eliminate him from the crime scene. It wasn't until 2003, with the advancement in testing techniques, that Dr. Edward Blake was finally able to exclude Yaris' DNA from any of the biological material found at the crime scene. And on September 2003, Yaris became the 140th US prisoner to be exonerated by post-conviction DNA testing. But Yaris could not immediately be released, as an escape bid in 1985, along with charges connected to the escape, meant he still had a 30-year sentence to serve, to which 23 would be in solitary confinement. It wasn't until January 2004 that he was finally released after spending 8,057 days behind bars, in the same prison and conditions as Ted Bundy, for a crime DNA confirms he did not commit. Since his release, Yaris has moved to the UK and is a father to 4 children. During his time inside, Yaris lived with serial killers, psychopaths and cannibals, and spent 23 years fighting his conviction. He suffered brutal beatings at the hands of cellmates and contemplated suicide on several occasions, but eventually took to studying and turned his thoughts to education. Yaris has suffered tremendously and still bears the physical pain of the many beatings he received inside. He was awarded $4 million for his wrongful imprisonment and has written a book, The Fear of 13, Countdown to Execution, My Fight for Survival on Death Row, which is currently being made into a movie that is going to be released in 2017, and possibly a new Netflix drama. So there's 5 people who it seems were convicted for crimes they did not commit. Before I end, I want to let you know that I have an exciting new feature on the Top 5's website, where I am narrating articles for you to kick back and listen to. I'll talk more about it another time, but go check out the latest one to learn about 5 more people who were wrongfully convicted. Thanks for watching, enjoy your freedom, and I'll see you next week for another video.